They thought I came to beg. They thought I walked into that conference room because I needed something from them. I could see it on my brother's face the moment I sat down. That slow, satisfied smile like a cat watching a mouse walk into a trap. My mother adjusted her pearl necklace. My father straightened his tie. And I sat there, hands folded in my lap, and I let them think whatever they wanted. Because in about 20 minutes, everything was going to change. My name is Claire. I am 31 years old, and for most of my life, I was the daughter my family forgot they had. I don't say that to be dramatic. I say it because it is simply true. My brother Marcus was 3 years older than me, and from the time I was old enough to understand what attention looked like, I understood that most of it went to him. He was the one my father coached in Little League. He was the one my mother drove 2 hours each way to piano competitions. He was the one whose report cards got framed on the refrigerator. Mine got glanced at, nodded over, and slipped into a drawer. I told myself for years it was because Marcus needed more. He struggled in school. He had anxiety. He needed extra support. I told myself I was the easy one, the low-maintenance one, and that my parents loved me just the same, just differently. I believed that until the summer I turned 18. That was the summer my grandmother, my father's mother, offered to pay for my college education. All 4 years. Room and board, textbooks, everything. She had called me herself, sitting in the sunroom of her house in Connecticut, and told me she was proud of me, that she had watched me work hard my whole life without much recognition, and that she wanted to do something about it. I cried. I actually cried. I told her it was the most generous thing anyone had ever done for me. She told me she would handle everything with my parents directly. What happened next? I did not find out until years later. My grandmother called my father. My father told her that Marcus had just enrolled in a private business program that cost $80,000 a year, and that if she gave money to me and not to Marcus, it would devastate him emotionally and set back his progress. He told her Marcus was fragile. He told her the timing was terrible. He told her I was resilient, I was strong, I would figure it out on my own. My grandmother, who trusted her son, agreed to wait. She died 14 months later. I went to community college on a part-time schedule while working 30 hours a week at a logistics company. I took out loans. I ate a lot of pasta. I moved into an apartment with 2 roommates I found on Craigslist. I did not ask my parents for help because every time I tried, there was always a reason why the timing was not right. Why Marcus needed something more urgently, why I should be proud of how independent I was becoming. Marcus, during this time, lived at home. Marcus drove a car my father bought him. Marcus got a job at my father's company at a salary I later found out was nearly double what I was making after 6 years in the workforce. I want to be clear that I do not hate my brother. Marcus is not a cruel person. He's simply a person who was handed everything and never once questioned whether he deserved it. That is not entirely his fault, but it is also not mine. By the time I was 26, I had my degree, a promotion at work, and a very clear picture of who my family was. I started to pull back. Not dramatically, no screaming fights, no burned bridges. I just stopped making myself so available. I stopped driving 3 hours round trip for Sunday dinners where my mother talked mostly to Marcus and my father asked me polite questions like I was a colleague he ran into at a conference. I built my own life. I had friends. I had an apartment I was proud of. I had a job managing supply chain operations for a regional manufacturing company, which sounds dry, but I was genuinely good at it, and it paid well. And I had, quietly and without much fanfare, maintained a relationship with the one person in my family who had always actually seen me. My grandmother's younger sister, my great-aunt Eleanor. Eleanor was 79 years old and lived alone in the house she had shared with her late husband for 51 years. It was a beautiful old colonial in western Massachusetts. 4 bedrooms, a barn out back, 11 acres of land that backed up against a nature preserve. She had no children. Her husband, my great-uncle Robert, had built a small manufacturing business that he sold in the late 90s for considerably more money than anyone in the family liked to discuss openly. Eleanor and I had always gotten along. When I was a child, she was the adult who talked to me like I had something worth saying. She asked me questions and actually listened to the answers. She remembered things, what book I was reading, what project I was working on at school, what I had worried about the last time we spoke. After my grandmother died, Eleanor and I started talking on the phone more regularly, once a week, then twice. She would call me on Sunday mornings. I would call her on Wednesday evenings. We talked about everything: her garden, my job, old movies she loved, frustrations I was working through. She told me stories about her husband, about their early years, about choices she was glad she made and a few she was not. My parents knew Eleanor and I were close. They found it mildly amusing in the way that adults find harmless quirks amusing. My mother once described it to a friend as Claire's little project, keeping Eleanor company, like I was volunteering at a shelter. What they did not take seriously was that Eleanor, over those years, had come to trust me completely, and what they did not know at all was that Eleanor had changed her will. Eleanor had a heart attack in January, not a fatal one. She was stubborn, and her cardiologist said she was also simply lucky, but it was serious enough that she spent 2 weeks in the hospital and another month in a rehabilitation facility. I took 10 days off work and drove up to be with her. I stayed in her house, drove to the rehab facility every day, brought her the audiobooks she liked, and the specific brand of green tea she refused to compromise on. My father sent flowers. My mother called twice. Marcus sent a text that said, "Hope you feel better soon. Aunt Eleanor, thinking of you," with a small heart emoji. Eleanor noticed all of this. Eleanor noticed everything. When she was well enough to sit up and hold a conversation for more than an hour, she looked at me one afternoon over her green tea and said, "I've made some decisions. I want you to know about them." I told her she didn't need to tell me anything, that she should rest. She gave me the look she reserved for people who were being gently foolish. "Claire, I'm 79. I had a heart attack. I am not being morbid. I am being practical. Now sit down and listen." I sat down and listened. She told me she had updated her estate documents 2 years earlier. She told me that the property, the house, the land, and the remaining assets from Robert's business, which, after decades of careful investment, amounted to something I was not fully prepared to hear, would be placed into a trust. The trust had conditions. The primary beneficiary was me. I did not say anything for a long moment. "You've been here," she said simply, "not because of this. I know that. You were here before you knew any of this, and that is exactly the point." She asked me not to tell anyone. I told her I wouldn't. I drove back to her house that evening and sat in the kitchen for a long time in the dark. Eleanor passed away in September. It was peaceful, her doctor said. She had gone to sleep and did not wake up. I got the call at 6 in the morning, and I sat on the edge of my bed, and I held the phone in both hands, and I let myself cry for as long as I needed to. Then I called the attorney she had told me about. His name was Mr. Hargrove. He had a calm, steady voice, and he told me he had been expecting my call and that he would be in touch with the family within the week to schedule the reading of the will. My father called me that same day. His voice had a texture I recognized. Not grief, exactly, but the performance of grief, slightly too measured, slightly too composed. He said Eleanor's passing was a real loss and that the family would need to come together. He mentioned, almost as an aside, that he assumed Eleanor had remembered everyone in the will and that he hoped the process would be simple and that he had already spoken to his own attorney just to be prepared. I said I understood. I said I would see him at the reading. I did not say anything else. The reading was scheduled for a Thursday, 2.5 weeks after Eleanor passed. It was held at Mr. A. Hargrove's office, a low-rise brick building in a quiet part of the city. Conference room on the second floor, a long oval table with 8 chairs and a credenza along one wall, with a water pitcher and glasses that nobody touched. My father arrived first, then my mother, then Marcus, who came in behind them wearing a blazer I had never seen before, which told me he had gone shopping for the occasion. They sat on one side of the table. I sat on the other side. Mr. Hargrove sat at the head. My father smiled at me when I walked in, the particular smile he used for situations he considered already resolved. My mother said it was nice that I had come all this way. Marcus looked at his phone and then put it face down on the table in a gesture of performed restraint. Mr. Hargrove began. He explained the structure of the estate in measured, professional language. The property in western Massachusetts, the investment accounts, a smaller account designated for charitable donations to a local land trust per Eleanor's specific instructions, a few personal items distributed to specific individuals by name, a writing desk to a former colleague, a set of first edition novels to the town library. My father leaned forward slightly as Mr. Hargrove reached the primary distribution. The remainder of the estate, Mr. Hargrove reached the primary distribution. Hargrove said, including the property, the primary investment portfolio and all associated assets, is held in trust under the terms Mrs. Ziz. Eleanor Marsh established in the updated documents filed 2 years ago. He paused the way attorneys pause when they are about to say the part everyone came to hear. The sole beneficiary of that trust is her great-niece, Claire. My mother's expression didn't collapse all at once. It went in stages. The smile first, which froze, and then stiffened, and then her eyes, which cut to my father with a look I had seen before, a look that meant, fix this. My father sat back in his chair. I'm sorry, he said, and his voice had lost its evenness. Could you clarify the terms? I assumed the estate would be distributed among the family. Mr. Hargrove said that he was happy to clarify and proceeded to do so with the patience of a man who had done this many times and was untroubled by the reaction. Marcus said, there has to be some kind of mistake. There has to be some kind of mistake. There was no mistake. My father requested a private conversation with Mr. Hargrove after the formal reading. I sat in the waiting area downstairs. I could hear, distantly, the sound of his voice through the ceiling. Not the words, just the tone, the rise and fall of a man arguing with reality. My mother came and sat next to me. She said, very quietly, that she hoped I understood this would affect the family. I looked at her for a moment. I thought about the phone call my grandmother had made, the college fund that had been redirected. I thought about the Sunday dinners. I thought about Eleanor alone in a rehabilitation facility sending thank you texts to a nephew who had sent flowers. I've been part of this family my whole life, I said. You just didn't always notice. She didn't respond to that. My father came downstairs 20 minutes later. He looked at me in a way I hadn't seen before. Not dismissive, not warmly parental, but something more honest, as if the performance had run out of steam. He said he thought we should talk, as a family, about how to handle this fairly. I told him I was open to a conversation. I told him I would have my own attorney reach out to his. He looked surprised. I think he had expected me to be grateful for the invitation to negotiate. I was not there to negotiate. The legal process took 4 months. My father's attorney sent several letters suggesting that Eleanor had been unduly influenced, that her mental state in her final years had been compromised, that the updated will should be contested. Mr. Propresent. Hargrove responded with documentation, Eleanor's medical records showing full cognitive clarity through the date the documents were signed, statements from the 2 independent witnesses present at the signing, and a letter Eleanor had written in her own handwriting, specifically anticipating this challenge and addressing it with a precision that made clear she had thought it through completely. The letter said, among other things, that she had watched her grandniece show up without being asked, give without expecting anything in return, and treat her like a person worth knowing, rather than an asset to be managed. She said she had made her decision freely, clearly, and with full knowledge of her family's likely response. The contest was withdrawn in February. I own the house now. I was out there last weekend. The barn needs some work on the roof, and the garden Eleanor kept so carefully has gone a little wild since fall, but in a way that isn't entirely sad. Things still growing, just on their own terms now. I walked out to the back of the property in the early morning where the land meets the tree line and the nature preserve begins, and I stood there for a while in the quiet. My father has not called since February. My mother sent a brief email in March that I have read several times and not yet replied to. Marcus texted me on my birthday. A short message, genuinely warm, I think, and I haven't decided yet what I want to do with that. I don't carry a lot of anger anymore. I carried it for a while. And then one morning, I woke up and it was simply lighter, like something I had set down without fully noticing. What I carry now is something harder to name. A kind of clarity, maybe. An understanding that the people who see you, really see you, not the version of you that is useful to them, are rare and they are worth everything you can give them. Eleanor saw me. She saw me when I was 23 and working a job I was overqualified for, and eating pasta 4 nights a week, and trying to figure out who I was without anyone's help. She saw me at 30 when I drove up to sit with her in a hospital room and didn't make a single calculation about what it might cost me. She gave me a house and 11 acres of land and enough financial security to make choices I had never let myself imagine. But if you ask me what she actually gave me, I will tell you, it was simpler than that. She gave me the proof that I had always been worth knowing. I wasn't the afterthought anymore. I never actually was.